All right, thank you for that introduction, Maya. Yeah, I think it's important to have an awareness of my context, and that I'm coming from this place of someone studying clinical psychology. And from a clinical psychologist perspective, my interest in breathing is very much in, well, how can we use something like respiration in helping people deal with stress, deal with anxiety, bring their suffering down. So in that realm of looking at anxiety and anxiety-related disorders, there are already a lot of great treatments out there. Medications have been shown to be very effective for these disorders, as well as therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy. Again, these treatments have been shown to be very effective, but they kind of come with their own issues. Medications often have undesirable side effects. And then therapies, while they're great, they require, often one-on-one time with a professional. It's usually quite expensive. And often there's long wait lists. So there's definitely room for other types of treatments to be explored here. So relaxation therapies have shown to be a great way to help lower stress and anxiety as well. And I'll just note that a lot of the psychotherapies like CBT and things would incorporate relaxation therapy as a part of that. But even when they're just utilized on their own, they've been shown to have medium to large effect size in meta-analyses. So working just as well as the medications or the other therapies. No side effects in the relaxation therapies, very minimal needs for training or support, and they can be self-administered. While that last point that they can be self-administered is great, it's also not so great, because that means that it really requires the self-discipline of an individual to say, okay, like I'm going to carve out the time to do this practice. When there's a financial exchange with a trained professional, they're probably going to make that time. But when it's just on your own volition to kind of come up with the time and create the space to make that in your day, it can be a little bit more challenging. And we know this is important because in this van der Zwaan 2015 study, it was shown that increased compliance is the greatest predictor of stress reduction. And this was looking across 3 different types of treatment. They had an exercise group, they had a mindfulness group, and they had a HRV biofeedback group. So a group that's doing just a lot of breathing at a slow-paced breathing. And it didn't matter what group people were in, the biggest barrier or the biggest predictor for bringing their stress down was, did you do the exercise? Did you do the breathing? Did you do your mindfulness sits? So how do we bring compliance up? It's kind of a key question for relaxation therapy's efficacy. So if we're able to come up with treatments that don't take as long, don't require special locations where you can't be distracted, and that are inherently somewhat engaging or interesting, it might be a really good treatment for us moving forward. So thinking about relaxation and relaxation therapy and why that might be helpful, Herbert Benson coined this term, the relaxation response. And this is the idea that there's a whole physiological response that your body undergoes, and that this kind of holistic response is an achievable state. So in this state, he was observing decreased levels of oxygen consumption in the body, decreased heart rate, decreased breathing rate, and decreased muscle tension. And it was like all of these things kind of almost in concert working together at the same time. He also acknowledged that there was a number of different ways to arrive at this place of this relaxation response. You could do progressive muscle relaxation, autogenic training, controlled breathing, qigong, yoga, various forms of meditation. There was no one path to get here, but there seems to be this, if individuals were able to kind of reach this state, good things were happening. We can kind of look now and see that, a lot of these tasks really have breathing as either a central point of what they're doing, or that breathing is very affected when people are doing them, which is also exhibited by seeing the decreased breathing rate in this relaxation response. So whether the breath is directly being affected or it's an indirect cause, it's very present in these treatments. So thinking more about the breath, for something so simple that we all do all the time, incredibly complex. So the regulation of respiration is happening on a number of different levels. So in the brainstem, this area in green. That's a lot of the metabolic functions of breathing are happening that are just kind of automatically happening all the time. There's specific neurons that are only focusing on the timing of when you're breathing in, the inspiration. Another group of neurons looking at the post-inspiration pause. So after you've taken that breath in, is there a little bit of a pause, which is important to coordinate tasks like speaking, swallowing, coughing, and your body just kind of does that. So there's some neurons to do that. There's other neurons in the brainstem that are just dealing with expiration and when that kind of gets triggered and brought on. So there's a whole world there of literature that's very complex, involving a number of feedback loops, but very, very interesting. But aside from this autonomic thing that's kind of happening all the time and meeting our very basic needs, the emotional centers in the limbic system have also been shown to be very involved, both with being in different emotional states and that's showing different breathing patterns during, but also anatomically showing connections between areas like the amygdala connecting to these metabolic centers of the brainstem. And finally, there seems to be cognitive aspects as well. So higher up in the cerebral cortex, researchers can stimulate specific areas and see the muscles in the diaphragm or the intercostals move and contract. And this happens even if you cut some of the things happening in the brainstem. So independent of what's happening in the brainstem, you can poke certain places in the cortex, and you're still getting kind of control over the breathing. So there's so many different players that are reaching in and working with the breath. And of course, we also have just conscious control of that, where we can choose to, like, how long do I want to breathe in for? How long do I want to breathe out for? And the effects over all these systems that would have. So on that note, there are so many different ways to breathe, which is, for such a simple thing, might seem interesting, and has made this kind of difficult to really pull together a lot of the research about. So researchers need to be aware of, are you breathing through your mouth? Are you breathing through your nose? Are we thinking about the in-breath someone's taking or the out-breath? Does it have to do with the ratio of how long you're breathing in for how long you're breathing out? Where is the breath happening? Is it more up in the chest, or is it lower down in the stomach? And retention, is the breath being held? Is the breath being held after the inhalation? Is the breath being held after the exhalation? So all of these are all different little questions to ask when someone says, oh, they did a controlled breathing experiment and they told people to focus on their breath for 3 minutes. And it's like, well, what were they doing? So there's a lot going on there, and a lot of different ways one could do a breathing technique. But when people are doing controlled breathing techniques, they're not just breathing, they're also paying attention to something. So if you tell someone to breathe in a certain way for 5 minutes, they're going to be paying attention to their breath. But that's not just paying attention, there's also a sense of goal setting. They're moving towards achieving something. For the next 5 minutes, they're going to be following a certain program. And then at the end of that, oh, they achieved moving through that. So that's going to have an effect. And again, it's not just concentrating on something for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's concentrating on something happening in your body. So on top of all the different ways one could breathe, we're also doing all of these things, which might have their own inherent value when we start to think about lowering stress, lowering anxiety. So to kind of get a little bit more nuanced, thinking about the inhale or the exhale. So typically when you take a breath in, heart rate goes up. And when you take a breath out, heart rate goes down. So taking a breath in, pressure starting to build in the body, and we're getting more pressure into the heart, and the heart rate's going to go up to kind of move that pressure around and balance that out. But once the exhale happens, there's less pressure in the body, there's less of a need to be spreading that pressure around, so the heart rate can slow down. So we see with the inhale and the exhale a change in the heart rate. We also see a change in pupils, so the dilation or contraction also aligns with the inhale and the exhale. There's also some interesting studies that have been done around coming back to emotions, where individuals who are shown emotional faces, they're able to recognize those faces faster, specifically when they're breathing in. And this was actually an interesting study where it was only when they were breathing in through their nose did this happen. So breathing in through the mouth, there wasn't this heightened effect of attention and memory, but when breathed in through the nose, there was this effect. So this is kind of a bit of a newer line of research around, is there something special about nasal breathing, specifically breathing in through the nose? And this group in 2018 had showed that with ultra slow mechanical stimulation, so they were kind of mechanically stimulating some of these cells, they were able to see whole cortex shifts based on the frequency they're doing that at. So this idea that activating something through breathing in through the nose is having these really large-scale effects in the brain. It's an area of certainly further interest. But despite all the different ways there are to breathe, the general consensus is that it's a slower breath that's going to be helpful to combat stress and anxiety. And it's going to be different from person to person, but they've found that for most individuals, between 4.7 and 7 breaths a minute, that's the amount of the frequency of breath that seems to be having the greatest effect on the physiological aspects of heart rate variability, which has been shown to be like one of the most common outcomes to look at when thinking about stress and anxiety and how breathing is incorporating into that. Just as a reference, most people take between 12 and 16 breaths in a minute. It's kind of an average number. So bringing that down to 4 to 7 is a significant amount. Also, there's a general sense that the exhale is longer than the inhale, and that might make sense from what we were talking about with, when we breathe in, we see heart rate come up, and when we breathe out, heart rate goes down. So spending more time in this place of exhaling and bringing the heart down has been shown in a few studies, but this hasn't always been the case. There's also been studies that have shown that, having equal in and out is best. So there's a bit of a mixed literature there. And in this study in Clintworth's 2012, they showed that this phenomenon of having the exhale be longer than inhale being helpful is only relevant for when you're doing slow breathing. So if you're doing your normal 12, 13, 14 breaths a minute and having a longer exhale than an inhale, it's not showing up physiologically in your heart rate or your heart rate variability. It's not having an effect in that. So it's only when doing these kind of slower paced breathing exercises. And the interesting thing about all this that I think is really interesting anyway, is that these physiological effects that we're seeing, they're very here and now. So when in the middle of doing the breathing exercise, we're seeing these shifts in heart rate variability and these drops in heart rate. But as soon as your breathing goes back to a normal breath, all of those changes go away. So if you measure someone, right after they finish one of these techniques, you're not going to really see a physiological signal for it. And if you measure someone 60 minutes later, you're not going to see a signal for it. However, the emotions, cognitions, ability to perform mental tasks, those have shown some longer term shifts that aren't constrained to just this moment right here and right now. So we have the breathing in, the breathing out, a little bit of the ratio between them. What about the retention of the breath, the holding of the breath? So this is actually a well-known thing that's been known for quite a long time, is that after you take that breath in, and if there's a longer pause after that in-breath, you quickly produce a rapid and pronounced heart rate decrease up to 20 beats per minute. There we go. So as you can see here in this picture, in the top picture, we have volume. So breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And then there's a sharp inhale, so a bigger breath in, and then this flat line means the breath is held. So someone took a sharp breath in and they held their breath, and what's happening with their heart rate? So we can see as the breath went in, okay, heart rate went up a little bit, heart rate went down a little bit, heart rate went up. With this sharp inhale, yes, there was a spike of the heart rate going up, but then very quickly we see this very sudden drop in heart rate. And so from gray line to gray line, that's about 8 seconds. So within the course of about 4 seconds, we're seeing this 20 to 25 beat per minute in this particular individual. This is individual data from one person, seeing a huge drop in their heart rate. it's happening very rapidly. And then it goes back. But just as far as the connectedness of our breath and our heart, and there's a lot going on there. It's interesting. So yeah, not very many studies do a great job of really carefully looking at the different, oh, what if we did the inhale a little bit more, the exhale a little bit more, and to really parse that apart. This Jafari et al. Study, I think, did a really good job at this. So they, when the same individual, so it was a within subject design, they looked at 4 different conditions. So they'd have the same person breathe in 4 different ways. The unpaced breathing would be just them naturally, not even thinking about their breath, just like living their life sitting in this chair. The paced breathing would be whatever rate they were found to breathe at. Let's say they breathed at 13 breaths per minute, just as they were normally living their life. The paced breathing would be them watching a monitor that's telling them to breathe at 13 breaths a minute. So it'd be cueing them in the correct seconds to take a breath in now and take a breath out. It's the same rate they would typically breathe at, but it's paced. They're attending to something. Then they had 2 slow, deep breathing groups, one that had an emphasis on the breath on the inhale, so that would be the 6-2, with the inhale 3 times as long as the outhale. And then the second group with the focus on the exhale, so a relatively short inhale and then a long exhale. So what they did is they wanted to look at pain perception. So for each individual, they figured out, okay, at what point do you take they had a piece of metal in their hand, and at what point does that piece of metal go from feeling warm to feeling hot to ow, to hurting? And at that point right there, they consider that to be someone's pain threshold. And what they would do is they would very quickly ramp up to 1 degree Celsius above that pain threshold for each of these different conditions. And what they saw here, so we have the black line is the unpaced breathing, so just the natural. All of the different breathing groups experienced less pain. So there was less pain when they were breathing and paying attention to their breath than when they weren't. So this is just saying that there's no effect. It doesn't matter how you're breathing. It's just a matter that you're paying attention to your breath. It could even be that you're paying attention to something in this just above threshold pain. But yeah, no difference around if you're breathing slow or if you're breathing your normal rate. That didn't make a difference. If we go up to the 3, so this is 3 degrees above the person's threshold, so it's quite a bit more painful. Suddenly we start to be able to parse this out a bit more. So again, this red group is a group that they're breathing their normal breathing rate, but they're paying attention to it. They're being cued on it, and they're seeing a significant drop in their pain. But on top of that, we're also seeing specifically this blue group is showing an even further drop. And the blue group was the group that had the long exhale, whereas the green group had the long inhale. And there was no difference between this red group and this green group. So even though the green group is doing the slow breathing, there wasn't any difference there between the green and the red group on pain perception. So this suggests that, oh, the ratio of inhale to exhale is actually quite important, at least for pain perception. We don't know about other outcomes, but I thought that was a delicate study. So now I'll talk about the study that I did at Simon Fraser University. So there's a breathing technique called the 4-7-8 breath, which is a 4 count in breath through the nose, a 7 count pause or retention of the breath, and then an 8 count exhale of the breath through the mouth. And that's repeated 4 times. So the whole technique takes 1 minute. This was popularized by Dr. Andrew Weil as a bit of a cure-all for stress and anxiety. And if people just did this 1 minute thing twice a day for up to 2 months, he said you don't need anything else. That's gonna cure you. So that was the claim he had made, and he was quite popular for making that. Anecdotally, a lot of people use this to fall asleep and find it quite helpful, but it hadn't been tested experientially. So that was what I wanted to investigate. So we did this by having 3 different groups. One group was taught this breathing technique and told to do it twice a day for 2 months. A second group was taught a counting exercise. They just, using an app, they watched a screen count from 1 to 10 over and over and over again. And then for 2 months as well. And then a final group that was a waitlist control, where they came in, we took some measurements from them, they left, lived their life as normal, came back 4 weeks later, and then we taught them the breathing technique. and everyone was using a mobile application so we could track if they were actually doing the techniques or not. So first, what we found with the waitlist control, again, at baseline, they came in, took some measurements of their anxiety. You can see here on the y-axis, they're up around 50. For the particular scale we were using, 37 is a cutoff for mild anxiety, and 43 is considered a cutoff to be someone who's experiencing like a distressing amount of anxiety, an amount of anxiety we would expect someone to be coming in for treatment for. So these people are pretty anxious, and over the first 4 weeks, this waitlist control group didn't change, which is great. When we teach them the breathing technique at this 4-week time point, we see that their anxiety come down quite a lot. So this is 5 or 6 points on this scale, which is a significant chunk. If we look at the effect size up here in the right-hand corner, this was a large effect. So this had a big difference for them. So that's the waitlist control group, but we had these other groups as well. So what happened in these other groups? So just in the first 4 weeks, if we look at the 3 groups, so the blue line, that was the data I just showed you where we have very little change happening in this waitlist control group. The red line is the group that was taught the breathing technique. So they have a pretty significant drop. Their anxiety came down in a quite pronounced fashion. And this green group was doing the counting group. So even just paying attention and counting, kind of a boring thing, you're just counting, doing that every day seemed to be helpful. Maybe not as helpful as the red line, but helpful nonetheless. If we look at the statistics of this, this was not statistically significant. But if we look at an effect size, which is saying, well, you know, statistically you weren't able to show this because you didn't have enough people, but it looked like there was a small to medium effect of this. When we compare this to other types of relaxation studies, mindfulness interventions, things that are more of the pronounced doing hours of relaxation over the course of a week, we would expect to see more up in that 0.06 in that medium range. So this is seeming to be not as effective as those other classical relaxation trainings. Now, if we look at just the counting group and the breathing group over the full 2 months, we do see a statistically significant difference here. So we had more individuals we were able to look at this comparison with. So a very similar effect size, still in that 0.03 range. So it's not like a huge effect, but there's a little bit of an effect there. And that effect, again, is we have the breathing group doing the breathing twice a day is bringing anxiety down. The counting also bringing anxiety down, but not quite to the same degree. So that seems to be helpful with stress and anxiety to some degree. This was also an interesting measurement of the study in that we asked everyone, oh, would you recommend this intervention to a friend? Individuals in the breathing group, 40% of them strongly agreed with that statement. And in the counting group, only 20% agreed with that. So there does seem to be this real difference of there's something about that particular breathing technique that people were finding benefit in. To some degree, maybe their anxiety was coming down a little bit more, but maybe there's something else that we've yet to parse out. So in conclusion, the study that we performed suggested that performing a brief breathing technique twice a day is a contributing factor to lowering self-reported trait anxiety over the 8 weeks. I didn't show this data, but it's not related to how frequently the intervention was performed, which was quite interesting. So yeah, if someone was doing it every day, we weren't seeing them getting more benefit than someone who was only doing this once every couple of days, as far as when they're using the app to do it. But the counting group came down too, which seems that slowing down for brief moments each day helps. It seems like doing this particular breathing technique might help a little bit more than just pausing and counting each day. But that learning to do some sort of thing that helps you kind of stop and slow down every day seems to be helpful. Even just learning to do that, regardless if you do it or not, is what the data seems.